Good afternoon. My name is Father Mark Perkins. Thank you for joining us on this Continuing Forward webinar. I am the chaplain and assistant headmaster of St. Dunstan's Academy in Roseland, Virginia, and I'm also on the domestic missions team for the Diocese of the Eastern United States and the Anglican Province of America. I am the APA representative to Continuing Forward. I'm joined today by Father Wade Miller, who is my predecessor as the APA's representative to Continuing Forward. Father Miller is the rector of St. Philip's Anglican Church in Blacksburg, Virginia, and he served as the canon missioner for the Diocese of the Eastern United States in the APA from 2022 to 2024. So welcome, Father Wade.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. Well, today, what we're going to talk about is the history of St. Philip's and Father Wade's ministry with St. Philip's, and also, in particular, its relation to Blacksburg and to the Virginia Tech community, and what ministry in a college town looks like. Before we turn to St. Philip's, though, I'd love to hear you tell our audience about your spiritual journey before coming to Blacksburg. How is it that you ended up in the Anglican tradition and eventually at St. Philip's?
Yeah, I was raised in a kind of a broad evangelical tradition that had a little bit of a reformed bent to it. Spent a year at Moody Bible Institute, graduated from Cedarville University with a degree in history. From there, I didn't know what I was, but I knew that I probably was not a Baptist anymore. So I went to Reformed Theological Seminary and studied in Orlando, studied there. And there I became more and more convinced that I needed to learn more about the broader tradition of the church. Ended up going to Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia, studied there. And while a student at Westminster, my wife and I started going to our first Anglican church. It was an Episcopal church. It was the first time I had ever been in a liturgical church. A lot of people will go to like a Roman Catholic mass for a friend or something. I had never been to anything like it. And so my wife and I, at first, it kind of weirded us out a little bit, but it also was fascinating. And as I was reading church history, I was taking a class in the early church. It really connected a lot of what I was reading with what we were experiencing on Sundays. And so we kind of grew into that and loved it. We went through catechesis, which was very extensive. We had to read 2 books. It went on for probably about 15 weeks. It was very good, but we were part of the group. It actually not me, but the church itself made big headlines, Wall Street Journal and all that, because the bishop at the time was denying some of the cardinal tenets of the Christian faith. And so it was in the Philadelphia diocese. And so the church with the 3 priests, it was a bigger church, and with the vestry, they unanimously decided to disinvite the bishop from coming and doing confirmation, and they were going to have a bishop from Rwanda come in and do the confirmation. The diocese then sued the church, took their building, their beautiful church, rectory, cemetery, the whole 9 yards, and they were kicked out. My wife and I, we were not really privy to all the politics that were going on in the Episcopal Church. We just loved the worship. So we were kind of churchless after that experience. And so long story short, it wasn't until I took a job. I went to Cranmer for a year, but decided to take a job. I was offered a job teaching at a classical school in Raleigh, and we just connected with a really good Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, Our Savior, in Raleigh, North Carolina. As a matter of fact, the pastor is still there, Kevin Martin, really great guy, really good preacher, solid guy. And so we found a home. And so because of what was going on in the Episcopal Church, and because we still we were unclear of what the continuum was, really what the REC was and all that, we just locked into a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod that used a liturgy that was very similar to the 28 Book of Common Prayer. It was the old liturgy of the Lutheran tradition. And so yeah, so taught school, ended up after a while, the pastor and a couple of the elders came to me and really encouraged me to think about going to seminary, which was the last thing I wanted to do. But ended up then going up to Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, did the whole program, 4 years, which is kind of insane. But anyways, spent a lot of time in seminary, but had a great experience there. I have to say, hands down, just a phenomenal education. It really was. And so I was a Lutheran pastor for about 10 years in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I spent around 4 years up in the Adirondacks and then another 6 years in Brooklyn. And so, yeah, and the way I came into Anglicanism was, although I was in a very good church in Brooklyn, I was kind of like a fish out of water. I was the only one that used the hymnal. I was the only one that practiced some of the more, I would say, Catholic devotional practices of Luther and early Lutheranism. And so after a while, going to various events, and again, I was very cordial with all the clergy, great guys, but I just felt like I didn't fit. And so over time, I inquired, and Bishop Grundorf was great to me. Really helped facilitate me coming in, and was really a pastor to me. We talked at least once or twice a week as I was going through that process, and so here I am. So yeah.
So that's how you joined the APA. How did you end up at St. Philip's in Blacksburg?
So yeah, in our church body or diocese, you have to go through the Board of Examining Chaplains, which is a process of doing exams, and I did those exams. And then they really encourage you to do a curacy. Even though I had been a pastor for 10 years, the Anglican ethos is something very different than Lutheranism. So I did a short curacy in Weaverville, North Carolina, but Bishop Grundorf had floated the idea about the diocese wanting to really focus on missions, revitalization, with the understanding that down the road, church planning. And so Blacksburg was a church that I had visited because he had asked me to visit it. And I preached. I wasn't allowed to say mass or anything like that, but I preached here and really connected with the people. And I think on that particular Sunday, there were probably 9 people. So fast forward a year, when we talked about revitalization projects and where to go, this was one that I really thought had a lot of potential. And so, to his credit, he really took the leadership role of securing funding. We did a Lenten appeal where we raised $100,000 to help fund me for 3 years here, and the church kicked in, a small portion of a stipend, what they could afford. So we came here with the understanding that we might only be here 3 years, and it might be, a failed project, but we came here and things really worked out. And I know we'll talk about that. Yeah.
What year was that you came?
I came in 2015. Yeah. So I've been here a little over 9 years now, which is hard to believe. But so it's been pretty incredible to see what's happened here. Yeah.
You said there were 9 people on that Sunday. Was that typical in the congregation when you arrived, or was that low, or was that high relative to what was happening? And then the follow-up related to that is what made you and the bishop think that it was a good candidate for revitalization?
Good questions. Yeah. So that particular Sunday, that was probably about average, the 9. And when I say 9, I'm talking about their people. That doesn't include my family. As a matter of fact, All Saints in Charlottesville had 2 guys, one a deacon and one a priest, come down so that one could say mass and then the deacon could serve. All I did is preach. So, but I think that the reason why this was attractive is, first of all, this is the original Roman Catholic Church in pre-Vatican II. It was built, I think, in 47 in Blacksburg. It's right in town. We're walking distance to the campus. So, I mean, visibility, you can't get any better in terms of being in a community. Blacksburg, kind of like Charlottesville in the past and other communities, is always, in the top 15 for mountain towns. And there's a lot of people moving in, and the research here, because of tech and engineering and some of those things, it's growing. So we knew that this was a community that was growing. It was visible, had a building that did not look like a warehouse, a really beautiful building, and it just needed some care, and also needed people that would be invited to come and kind of explore what we're about. So the other thing is there's not an Eastern Orthodox church within 45 minutes of this place. And the Roman Catholic Church tends to be much more on the progressive end, liturgically, and, well, in all facets. So there was not really a traditional church here. There's a traditional Presbyterian church, and they've got a good group of people, good pastor. But as far as anything that would be Catholic or connecting with our Anglican heritage, there was nothing that was viable, really. There actually is a ACC church down the road, but at that time they were having some of their own issues, which they're doing better now. But yeah, so when we looked at it, we said, it would be terrible to lose this property and the visibility. But I will tell you this, the church had met with realtors because they were already kind of talking about, what if we have to sell, and what do we do if we have to just disband? So those conversations were happening right before I got here.
Yeah. So great building with a lot of potential, great location. It's an amazing location. I've been there a number of times. My daughter was actually confirmed there in March, which was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right stone's throw to campus. Really, really great place, but the number of parishioners was very low. How did the existing parishioners partner with you? What was their response to the possibility of you coming? And then how did you work with them as you started to move into your position there as vicar?
Yeah, no, that's good. I should say, even though we had 9 on that particular Sunday, by the time I got here, because that was a year later, 2 of those people had died and one person had moved away. So they were down to 6 people. So that was a little, scary, having 6 people. But yeah, the people, what I found, and Bishop Grundorf and I met, talked through what we were going to say and what we were going to present to them. And basically, the message was this: look, I'm showing you all my cards, if you will. This is what I plan on doing. This is what I think we have to do in order to see this grow. If you're not fully on board, that's fine. We shake hands and we go our separate ways, and there's no hard feelings. But if you want to do X, Y, and Z, then I'm going to need your involvement and your support. And if you have any issues with it, now's the time to talk about it, because if we get focused upon the drama later on, it's going to take away from our mission. So we had a very candid conversation that went on for hours, and it was great. And what I found is a group of people, when you're at 6 people, you don't have time to bicker about small things. Everybody was just so excited about the possibility of what could happen. We didn't know, but what could happen. Everybody bought in, and so I had some people that went above and beyond what I ever imagined in terms of their support and their help. So in retrospect, it was hard, very hard. and I'll get into that later. But one of the things we had to do is really clean up the building. It had been kind of neglected. And so there's a lot of work. And when I say work, I'm saying physical labor,
Mm-hmm.
which is something you're dealing with right now at St. Dunstan. So yeah, so a lot of it was just going in and cleaning up the place to make it presentable. So yeah. Did I
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I back in probably, I don't know if it's 2015 or 2016 that All Saints sent a little
Yeah.
crew down. At that time, I was just a parishioner at All Saints. I don't even remember if I was in seminary yet. I don't think I was. So I came down and we painted walls
Yeah.
and bushes and everything. So I was, tangentially involved from the beginning, and not to get too far ahead, but um, there's a sort of comprehensive way in which St. Philip's has transformed. That is to say that the numbers of people, which not to get ahead, but the sort of the vibrancy of the community, but it's also the physical space itself. Y'all have done a really marvelous job, and I've visited. It seems like every couple years and a number of times in the last year, and every time the space is more beautiful
Yeah.
and is more sort of thriving and full of energy. So
Yeah.
that's been a joy to see from elsewhere in the diocese.
Yeah.
Um, so you show up. There are 6 people, which means that you increased it by 70% more or less
Yeah.
by bringing your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you doubled it, right? I guess you would have doubled it.
Yeah. We doubled.
Um, so that's pretty good. That's pretty good growth right away. But how did
Yeah.
you? That's not a in it's not a lot to work with, and in my just observational experience, I tend to think that if you have over 40 people, you have a sort of a core set of a sort of a parish. That's our actual canonical standard, but it sort of feels like a parish. And if you have fewer than 20, it feels extremely tenuous. And
Yeah.
getting visitors and new people to commit to a church with those numbers, I'm sure is really challenging. So how did you do that? How did you attract people early on, and how did you draw people in?
Yeah. So one of the things, and being in Brooklyn kind of helped me do this, was just walking down Main Street, introducing myself to people that were, had businesses or whatever, being on the campus in my clerical, which, in this part of the country is like seeing the Loch Ness monster or something like that. Um, and then the other thing is every single festival that we could be in, we had a table giving information about our church. But I think a lot of it is just willing to be out of the office, out of the study, and just talking with people on the streets. I tried to contact every campus ministry leader on tech within the first 6 weeks that I was here, having lunch with them or having coffee. A lot of it's just letting people know that this church is not foreclosed or is ready to shut its doors, but that there's a revitalization project going on, and we want to be a part of the community. And so through that, we started seeing some people just say, "Hey, we read your literature." The other thing was the website. That was one of the first things I did when I got here, is to get a functioning, but also not just a functioning, but something that is beautiful, attractive, communicates. So people, through connection, through friends that told them about us or whatever, as I met with people, we were able to see, people just kind of show up. And there's an ACNA church here in town too that's very different than we are, and is definitely probably much more on the fringe of the I don't know how you say it, fringe in terms of worship and stuff, is very, very, like their clergy, they don't wear vestments and stuff like that, and they probably don't wear clerical much or anything like that. And so, not a lot, but there were a few people that wanted to see something much more intentionally Anglican. So we had a few people come from there, not a lot, but we had a few. But the buzz, I guess, is what was created. And so we had some people, not in droves, but we would have almost, every month we were having, 4 or 5 visitors come and check us out. And some people were like deer in the headlights. You could tell they'd never come back again. Some people were just amazed. And so I think from that, one of the things I did, Father Mark, that I would recommend to anybody, because this is something, in church planting revitalization, it's kind of like you got to look at your context, all this. Well, this transcends context in the sense that what we tried to do is, and it's patterned after what All Saints does, we tried to have a meal every Wednesday, which usually meant my family was cooking the meal every Wednesday. And then we would do catechesis. And part of it is because those 6 people, I didn't know where they were coming from theologically. I didn't know how much they knew. But part of it's we had all these new people coming saying, yeah, the worship was interesting, but they didn't have any connection like historically or biblically.
Mhm.
So what we did is eventually we developed a core group of people of almost 20 people within the first 6 months. And we just did catechesis, having a meal, started doing hanging out even outside of that Wednesday group. And that really built kind of a family together that many of those people were confirmed and they locked in, and we have people that have been here from that very beginning, which has
Mhm.
been, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about on kind of a similar note. Um, you why did you decide to change the name of the parish, and what was the from and to, and how did that sort of function as part of your vision for renewal in the parish?
Well, part of it's Bishop Grundorf and I talked, and he agreed because of how, I'll just give you an example. The sign out front said that, the worship time was 8 o'clock. Well, in reality, it had switched like a year and a half before that to 9 o'clock, but the sign still said 8 o'clock. So as I interacted with people in the community, even people that own shops and stuff on Main Street, what I came to realize is that people really thought this place was like closed. They thought it was pretty much, nobody was worshiping here or anything. So Bishop Grundorf and I said, we need a reboot that needs a whole new identity. So we decided to change the name. And when we talked about St. Philip's, the idea was, Philip's the one that said, come and see. And that was going to be our real thrust is come and see. And so
Mhm.
that's why we changed it to St. Philip. I wish I had a deeper theological reason for that, but that's why we did that. Yeah. A
Yeah,
rebrand. Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense to me, and uh, people talk about replanting. That's sort of a I don't know, a term of art or whatever, and the line between replanting and revitalization, and how you think about that. But um, yeah, there was that sense of a whole new reboot. It
Yeah.
makes sense, especially if you have a existing um, and sort of very firm negative reputation in the community. Similarly, not quite as dramatic, but I know out at St. James on Gloucester, we had Father Kevin Fife.
Mhm.
They made the name officially St. James on the Glebe, which has a nice English feel, but
Yeah.
also is a way of sort of broadcasting that this church is alive,
Yeah.
and thriving.
Yeah.
So now we're at almost 10 years in, not quite. Um, when did St. Philip's become, so it was a mission, and when did it become a parish? And what is the current status of how would you describe the parish today?
Yeah. So if my memory serves me correct, I think we became a parish in 2022. However, we probably were ready to do that sooner, but we had this thing called COVID. And we had some things that kind of, we just weren't in any rush to do it. But in 2022, I was installed as the rector. And and so yeah, the church, if, between our two masses, we average in the 80s. That's what we're averaging, which is, it's a good number. You've seen I guess our one issue here. Well, we have a couple issues with our building, but one of them's parking. So, that's something that we're already talking about. We're going to have to maybe address in the future because it's all street parking here, and Virginia Tech, as it grows, that street parking gets smaller and smaller. So we're going to have to address that. But yeah, so we really have seen it's not been growth suddenly. It's just been a slow, kind of methodical growth that's happened. And at the core of that is people really appreciating the rule of life aspect, and going through catechesis and then being taught how to pray, morning and evening prayer. We've got even a group right now. It's kind of a pilot group, but it's going to have other groups start up where guys do this together and hold each other accountable, to be praying the offices. And so yeah, it's been neat to see how people have really appreciated the rhythm and rule of life that we have within our really Benedictine but Anglican tradition. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know you have an assisting priest there. When did St. Philip's first bring on a curate or an assisting priest, and how has that changed the rhythm of the parish?
Yeah, so I think it was in 2019. We had a priest who was looking to come our way anyways into our diocese from another jurisdiction. And he, as a full-time job, he had gotten a job as a recovery specialist, helping people with recovery. He has a background in that and is certified with that. And so he came here and worked with me for about a year, and we gave him a stipend. We couldn't pay him a full-time salary or anything like that. He went on to then take another mission within our diocese. And then I guess it's been probably in 2023, we have brought on a curate. And initially, the curate was brought on because we were looking to maybe even start at least planning another mission, and also thinking about my responsibilities as canon missioner and all that. But anyways, yeah, the curate's here, and he has been a tremendous help to me. We don't pay him quite a full-time salary, but he is able to make it on what we do pay him. And we've also raised up a seminarian who's now the recipient of another Lenten appeal. He was a seminarian here, and well, he's a parishioner, then seminarian, Father Ian Gerald's, who's down in St. Thomas Alto. And now we got another guy that's in seminary. And so that's our hope, is that, part of our mission is to raise up within our parish future priests and help form and shape them and give them real formation. And so that's been great. And having another priest here has helped me be able to do that, which has been invaluable. So,
so what is not, every week is its own week in ministry, but during the school year, what would you say is a sort of typical week in the life of St. Philip's?
Yeah, well, I usually take Mondays off, but yeah, Tuesday through Saturday, we we have mass on Wednesday. On Tuesdays, usually my day, not only to study, prepare sermons, prepare catechesis materials and all that, but that's usually when I'm meeting people like students, things like that. On Thursdays, we now have a group that's their first meeting was last night. So we have a student run group that meets here for evening prayer, fellowship, and food.
Hmm.
And so that's called the Society of St. Alban. So, yeah, so they met for the first time and exposing other tech students who do not come from this background. Sometimes they can be intimidated going into a Sunday liturgy. This kind of helps ease them into it. And we give them all free prayer books and, try to teach them how to use it. So that's going on as well. So yeah, so I would say a lot of it is meetings for coffee. It's a good thing I like coffee because a lot of what I do is out in the coffee shops. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, neat. Um, yeah, speaking of which, you've mentioned the students and your time on campus. To what extent, how has the presence of Virginia Tech directly or indirectly affected your ministry, and how do you think about ministry in a college town, and specifically ministry sort of adjacent to a big university?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first thing, I need to be honest and say very few college students go to church, um, because like we used to call it Campus Crusade, now it's called Crew. They have their big worship experience thing on Thursday nights. You have InterVarsity, you have Reformed University Fellowship. So there's a lot of campus groups that do things during the week. And because these are students, because they're 18, 19, 20-year olds, they are not prone to get up on Sunday mornings and go to church. We do have a few students, but those have always been few and far between. But we do get more graduate students because by that time in their life, they've done all their partying, and I think they're a little more mature and they're ready to come. And so we've had a good connection with graduate students. So that's been very good. But we have a good relationship with Tech. As a matter of fact, they do what they call a big event, which is a big service project. And they're always sending us students to help, like with jobs, landscaping or raking or something like that. And then across the street from us, we have a fraternity house called Sigma Nu, and we have a great relationship with them. So several times throughout the year, they'll come and do service projects. They get service hours for doing it. We feed them pizza and we get to know them, and we build a really good relationship with them. So much so that if something were to happen in terms of like beer cans, which happens a lot, beer cans being thrown on our yard or churchyard or something, they'll come over here and clean that stuff up. So we have a great relationship with them as well. So being in a college town is, you got to understand that unless you're at a place like Hillsdale or a place where students are coming there for a particular reason, and they're a little more serious about things like faith and things like that, you're not going to get a ton of traffic. And that's not just us. Like, I've talked to the clergy around here, students don't go on Sunday mornings very often. It's rare to have a student show up at church on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is it like with how did how do grad students find you? How have they found St. Philip's, and is there a particular way that you approach ministry with grad students that differs from just anybody in the community?
Yeah. Well, we've had speakers come in for special events. Like, for instance, we had an iconographer come in, and we were amazed how many people showed up for that. And several grad students who are interested in art, interested in things connected to visual or even architecture or whatever. So we've had a professor from Tech come over and do a thing on sexuality. So we've had some of that, which is publicized over at Tech, and then we'll have students come in for that, and they're interested to hear. But I think getting them into our church, um, the beauty of the facility is very different than the functional worship spaces that a lot of them come from, and they ask a lot of questions, and they become very interested about that. So I think that's one big thing. I think the other thing, though, is just where we're located. I mean, people are going by us a lot. I mean, we have a lot of traffic, and so some people are like, "What's that building that looks like a castle?" You know, and so yeah, so we've had people show up. You know, even after church, we had three cadets because we have a big ROTC program here. We had three cadets just show up, and they were asking a ton of questions about the church and the space and everything like that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's neat. Um, Tell me a little bit about, if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about the podcast that you and Father Randall and Stu do. Where did that come from? And how do you conceive of that as part of your parochial ministry or as something sort of broader than that? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the brain child behind that was we have some people that live quite a distance from us, even young families. I think you know one of the families, they do their own dairy and it's all organic kind of farming, but they live an hour from the church. And so for them to be able to connect a lot of times through the week or whatever, it's just difficult for them to do because they're business. So one of the things we thought about is what can we do in terms of catechesis to help our people outside of Sunday or even Wednesday. And so we came up with this idea of doing a podcast rooted in catechesis that would help our own people, but obviously maybe be beneficial for people outside of St. Philip's. And so we this would have never happened if we did not have Stu, who's the digital media director for our diocese. He's in the office right behind me. So the fact that we have, because I cannot do anything when it comes to technology. So I asked my kids how to do my technology. So, but Stu, he was on board and thought it would be a great idea. And so yeah, right now we're going through the liturgy and talking about the biblical, historical underpinnings of the liturgy, and then talk about the application of that. And so yeah, we have Bishop Chad, we have you and Thomas that's coming out on election day because we figured that's a great time to release a podcast. So yeah, so that's been a lot of fun. But one of the things I was telling Stu today, I said, I don't think people realize how much work. So I put together the notes and it was 4 pages for the one we did today. It takes a lot of time to do that. But I feel like it's beneficial because our people, they really, I know for many of our people here, they love it and it's really helped them. So that's why we keep doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have put a lot of work into that. I definitely can see that and appreciate that. I think one of the things I appreciate about it is that it does have a very parochial, in the best sense of the word, a parochial view. That is to say, um, that it's, I know you have the bishop on to sometimes address the sort of big questions, the most recent one being about, was it Christian responsibilities in a democratic republic, big question. But at the same point in time, the even for that one, the focus is obviously on your parishioners and by extension other parishioners as well. And
Yeah.
that sort of focus on the needs of the parish, I think, actually makes it more, it can make it more useful in a broader sense than if you try to address the, quote unquote, big questions that are sort of universal. So I appreciate that even in the podcast form, there's a real focus on the needs of
Mhm.
parishioners.
Yeah.
I have one question that was dropped into the chat here that is very interesting, uh, and very near and dear to my heart. And if you wanted to plug that election day podcast, you could. But the question is, uh, the newspaper has been talking about the broader challenges today of young American men having trouble finding a purpose, finding what was once the normal path for many young men: college, job, marriage, children. Do you meet such young men on campus, in town, at the fraternity, or in your church? What are their needs? Is there anything you can do to reach and help them?
Well, let me talk about rites of passage. I'm just joking. Uh, yeah. It is interesting because Father Randall Russell, he's the curate here. He and I talk about this quite a bit. Um, part of part of this is when we get these, not just young men, but I know where the question's coming from because that's a real need in our culture. Is you know um, the job of the church, the job of all of us, is to create order out of chaos. That's what creation's about. That's what our calling is, and that begins with us, right? Having some kind of rule of life, something that is where we're not just living aimlessly, wandering, but there's an order to our lives. And I think with our young men and with our church is definitely a younger parish, but I think that that's what people are looking for, is an order. And so that's what, we really push because it's not a gimmick. That's what we're about as Anglo Catholics, is ordering our lives with the Eucharist at the center, but morning and evening prayer, and then accountability and emphasizing we don't browbeat people about this. We don't have to. People then want to come to confession. So they're living this life, this rhythm of Eucharist, morning, evening prayer, and then confession. And so that's been part of it for us. Is some of our young men have really flourished with that because being a male today and in the culture that we're living, sometimes you feel like you are the oddity and you don't fit. Well, this gives people a sense of taking control of their lives in a way where it is seeking God, in a culture that looks at you like you have two heads, especially for a man, because the whole idea, and this is nothing new, but especially in the context where we live in southwestern Virginia, it's just not masculine to go to church. It's not masculine. Well, when you really understand, order is the most masculine thing you can do, and that begins with self, and then that extends to whatever vocation or people that you're dealing with. That's our calling, and
Mhm.
that's what we kind of challenge our guys with, not in a Jordan Peterson way where we're giving people, but what I mean by that is we're not chiding them, but we're coming alongside them. Like tonight, I'll just tell you, we're having a huge, it's all male bonfire at the McCarthy's. Matt McCarthy's having it. There's no women there, not because we're anti-women, but it's a time for guys to just get together, hang out, and talk about some of these things. So,
Mhm.
with
Yeah,
some adult beverages. So,
yeah. Yeah, that's great. Um, I've been thinking, well, I've been thinking about this a lot because of the work that I'm doing at St. Dunstan's, but in particular, we had a group of um, 9 folks show up on campus. It was a older Anglican priest and theologian who's semi-retired now, and 3 of his sons, and then a number of other young men. They'd gone to the Touchstone Magazine conference in Chicago
mhm.
this past week, and then they stopped by St. Dunstan's campus on the way back. And I was struck by the sort of thoughtfulness and seriousness of these young men. He had his youngest son who's 11, but then all the other young men who were there were ages 18 to 25. Um,
Mhm.
and there was both a real seriousness of purpose, but also in a number of them a sense of a bit of uncertainty about the path forward for them in sort of America today. And I do think that sense of stability is lacking, and predictability is very lacking for young men today. Having a sort of path forward, in previous generations, of knowing that you're going to do what your dad did, for better or
Mhm.
worse. Of course, it comes with its own downsides. I don't want to be overly romantic, but there's a sense of stability and a sense of a trajectory that doesn't necessarily exist anymore.
Yeah.
And I do think that a parish and a parish community is one of the best ways to ground young men, and especially if you have a parish as yours does, with mature Christian men who are raising families and can then offer up a vision of a path forward for young men. I think that can be super helpful.
Can I
I would,
just interject one thing? One of the things I think it's important is I think when I step back and what I'm so humbled by is the fact that I'm not leading all this stuff. So, for instance, like this cohort group that they meet, they meet every Monday to say the liturgy for the litany for evangelism that Bishop Scarlett put together. They're saying the daily offices and everything. These guys, they asked me to help them, to give them input, but they're doing this on their own. And I think that's, the idea that all guys under the age of 30 just want to hang out in their parents' basement and play video games is not really true. And what I'm seeing too is which is good. I think it's great. Young people, including my own son, who's 22, my oldest, they're hiking more. They're trying to be outdoors more, and I think that they are longing for some kind of order, and they're seeking that. I think it's our job then as the church to come alongside them and help them, but then turn them loose so that they can then in turn help others. And that's what we've seen here. And it's taken over 9 years, but it's happening now. And that's, to me, that's one of the coolest things that's happening here.
mm-hmm. The other thing that one of the questions in the chat is about the needs of young women and whether they're similar or different than young men. Just in sort of priming that question, I was struck by I don't know if we mentioned the name of your podcast. We probably should do that. Mining the Mysteries is the name of it. And just because we also weren't clear about this, Thomas Fickley and I, who are the ones standing up St. Dunstan's Academy, were interviewed by Father Wade and Stu about young men and rites of passage. That's coming out apparently on election day, so I'll look forward to that. But two other great episodes that y'all have had in recent months were with Bridget Williams, who was represented the United States in pole vaulting at the Olympics. And as Bishop Chad is always quick to point out, she was also representing the APA. I don't think we got a patch on her uniform or anything, but Bishop Chad wants to claim her as the APA's Olympian, which I think is wonderful. So you guys did two great interviews with her about her experiences, her faith journey, the challenges, and I can't remember the specifics. There were just a few moments where she talked specifically about the challenges for young women in the kind of high pressure, for her, the high pressure career, and also sort of short and intense career of being an Olympic athlete. So either thinking about Bridget's own experiences or more broadly, how would you describe in your parish ministry the way that young women's needs differ, their challenges differ from that of young men?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I just want to throw this out about Bridget. Bridget's been she's been my administrator, or the administrator for the church, for at least 3 years, I think going on 4 years now. And the growth I've seen with her in terms of her Christian faith and practice has just been incredible. So if I did not have Bridget here, I'd be lost. My wife would tell you that because she keeps me organized and reminds me of things. With women, so we were supposed to have a clergy, or not clergy wives, a women's retreat in Conyers, Georgia. But then there was like this, I still don't understand what happened. I just know there's like a lot of pollution and the air quality went bad, so they canceled it. Well, the four ladies from our church that were going to go to this, they're not here because they went to the beach. And part of that, it's kind of cool. So they went there to pray morning prayer, evening prayer, for Theology on Tap. That's another thing we do here once a month. We're reading the life of St. Anthony by St. Athanasius. Well, they're reading that, discussing it. But part of it is they also want to develop more for women And so that's what they're talking about. But yeah, some of the challenges, because I have two teenage daughters, the whole body image thing is a big, it's just, always kind of seeing yourself through the eyes of social media or whatever that is. Yeah, it's a challenge. I think what's great though is we do have women that are great role models. Bridget, my wife, Val, I mean, Aaron, there's so many women that are, and Sarah Hayes, who's in her 80s. I mean, the women look up to her. She's just a woman of grace. And I think what's happened is, with these women is they're not creating a cultural kind of thing, but it's more of not finding your worth or your value in terms of simply your appearance or your accolades or anything. And Bridget talks about that on the podcast, but seeing that all that stuff's fleeting, but also feeling as though you're not all alone. And so with the women, what they're planning on doing is really developing a rule of life that will coincide with what the men are doing, but also give an opportunity and a forum for them to be able to talk about what it means to be a mother, what it means to work and try to juggle motherhood and those kind of things. And so, yeah, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I'm not a woman, but I know that that's in the works. And so we have some people that are really they're going to be working on that in the next several months and start the women will start meeting on a regular basis here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's excellent. My wife was also supposed to be on that canceled retreat, and so she took yesterday at the coffee shop. She just took the day, but we talked about, could we get her out to the um, get her and her another woman from our church was supposed to go as well. So they briefly talked about doing something like that, decided not to. But I'm glad
Yeah.
that your crew at your church did that.
I think they just need to get away from their husbands. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. All Saints has had here in Charlottesville, which is where I'm full time at St. Dunstan's down in Nelson County, Virginia, but I help out at All Saints on Sundays until we launch our own Sunday services at St. Dunstan's. And they've had a really strong, um, uh, a pretty relatively strong, at least, college ministry the last few years, which has been neat. And it's both been partly because of Father Sean's deliberate reaching out into the college community, but it's really been connecting with a few college students who get really excited and then bring their
yeah.
friends. So that's been
Yeah.
kind of neat. And just last 2 Saturdays ago, a young man and young woman who just graduated from UVA, who met in this parish, got married. So
Oh,
so that
wow.
was
That's
a great
incredible.
joy for the parish to get to celebrate that. And then they've just moved in around the corner. So they graduated from UVA, but they stayed in town to do some work. But they also stayed in town really to stay as be part of the parish. And they are renting a house right around the corner from the church. So there
That's
is
really,
I think about the sort of, I mean, the literature on the divergent outcomes of boys and girls, men and women, is pretty profound. Richard Reeves' book of Boys and Men is a really good
mm,
overview of how boys and men are struggling in America today. But there's also some older books by Leonard Sachs, Boys Adrift, and then Girls on the Edge or on the Brink. Um, and uh, that this sense of the divergence of the sexes, each facing really profound challenges, but different ones, I think is a really serious one. And I view the parish church as a place where uh, where the not that the broader cultural differences don't exist in any way, but that where there's a kind of common place and a common ground, because so much of what's happened is that with the increase of social media, there's a lot going on, but part of it is increasingly divergent, sort of sex segregated spaces,
mm.
where men and women are not, boys and girls are not brought together as much. Uh, Ironically, I'm starting a boys' school, but I actually think, and you mentioned the men's bonfire at your church. I actually think that a sort of healthy sense of camaraderie, a sort of deliberate, these are some times and spaces and places for sex segregation, but that the parish itself is not that.
Yeah.
And I think a sort of conscious sense of removal for certain purposes, but a commonality in the church is much healthier than what we have today, which is well, anyway, I'm rambling now, and we're
Yeah.
getting a little bit off topic. I guess so. We've got a few more minutes left, and I'm thinking about your ministry at St. Philip's over the years. Is there anything that you would look back on and say, you've already mentioned a lot of things that have worked really well. Is there anything that you haven't mentioned or that you want to emphasize and say, this really worked well for us at St. Philip's, or other things where you said, in hindsight, maybe it wasn't a mistake, but it didn't pan out, or I wouldn't do it the same way in the future? Are there any sort of lessons that you would have in general for church revitalization?
Yeah, I think that I mean, in general, I would say for church revitalization, you have to have a priest that is willing to work and work a lot, and that means he has to have a wife and family that understand that's going to take a lot of time. And I'm really big on not sacrificing. That's why I gave up the canon missioner thing. Not sacrificing your family. I want to be there for my daughter's senior year. She's involved in cross country and track and all that. But at the same time, there's a lot of work and it's a lot of time. And so I think you need a priest that is willing to do the work. I think the second thing you need is somebody that's just not afraid to engage with people. I know that sounds so elementary, but it's so true. Somebody that has the ability to talk and actually like talking to people and like meeting and getting out of the four walls of the church. You can talk about we need to engage the community, but if the priest is not, doing that, if he's not showing by example, and that's what Paul told Timothy, do the work of an evangelist. Well, Timothy was a bishop, but that's what he needs to do because people follow when they see that modeled. So that's generally, I know that's not exactly your question. As far as what worked, I think and you guys do it with the agape meals and everything. I think building that sense of community, because one of the things that is, I think, universal, this is not anything new here, but a lot of people are here and they have no family around them. So the church is their support, their family. And so on holidays or cookouts, they get together because that's their family. And I think building that, not that I did that. I mean, that's just people that are very genuine that love each other, and that's not been something that I had a plan and we put it into action. That just kind of happened, organically happened. So that's been great. And I think part of that, though, is because, again, talking about that rule of life, basing on what All Saints and you and Father Sean did a great job articulating from Acts 2:42, kind of the four marks of a healthy church, and not just a church, but if you're trying to revitalize. So that's one thing. As I look back, is there anything that I would say, man, we should have maybe not done that or done that differently or anything? Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, that's part of, I think, leadership is recognizing that there's things. So one of the things I would say, just right off the top of my head, is especially when we first got here, when you have people come but they're not locked in, but then you kind of spend so much energy chasing them,
Mhm.
uh, that becomes a very futile kind of thing. And I think over time, don't hear me that I'm apathetic. I'm just not as desperate as, I was. And I think part of that is you just recognize that, you can only do so much. But if you're expending your energy to this person that you think is just really going to be a great asset to your mission, and then all at once they disappear, and you've spent all that time, what's that say about all these other people that you could have been investing in as well? So I would say that's probably one of the things I look back on and say, yeah, there was probably too much time and energy spent with a particular person or people. And what I really needed to be doing was focusing more on these people over here. So
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good segue into mentioning our November webinar, which will be on Wednesday, November 6th, not our normal Thursday. Bishop Stephen Scarlett, who's the bishop of the Diocese of the Holy Trinity and the Anglican Catholic Church, will talk about his remnant perspective on spiritual formation and renewal. And part of that remnant vision is the recognition that the job of the rector begins with raising up
yeah,
people within the parish who are most dedicated and helping cultivate them so that they can reach out as well. I think
yeah,
that the tendency there can be a great tendency in parochial ministry to think that your number one job is to make sure that the most tenuously committed people don't leave. And so you
yeah,
spend all your energy on people who have a foot or half a foot or 1.5 feet out the door. Uh,
mhm,
and it's sometimes it can be motivated by, I think, a total misreading of the story of Jesus leaving the 99 sheep for the one.
yeah.
And I think that it does not mean that you don't attend to everyone in your parish. But anyway, we'll let Bishop Scarlett, who's thought a lot more about that, talk about that on November 6th.
That'll be
Last
great.
question. Um, just really quickly, is there anything at St. Philip's happening in the future that you're excited about, or anything you want to share for things moving forward at St. Philip's or in Blacksburg?
Yeah, no, I think well, this college group that met last night, that's kind of a big step for us. And again, it wasn't clergy run, it was clergy guided, but I didn't even show up last night. This is something that one of our members took it upon themselves, who's a student that wanted to do this. I think that's been great. I think that these groups that are coming together to hold each other accountable, I think that has been really exciting to see, and how that there's a real interest in developing and seeing that grow. So yeah, so we don't have any big events that I can speak of that's going to just rock Blacksburg. But I think as we continue to do this, we can. It's amazing to me to see how people are not only receptive, but then they're committing to really try to be consistent in their prayer life and coming to mass and going to confession and those type of things. So, I mean, we have all kinds of events, activities happening. We're very involved with the PRC here and the banquets coming up, and we're involved with the food pantry, and our kids. When I got here, the only kids were my own, and now on Sunday mornings we have almost 16, 17 kids showing up for Christian formation. They set up a little altar in the back with icons, and they start with a little chapel, and then they're I mean, it's just yeah, there's a lot of good things happening. And so we've expanded and got more people that have shown that they're dependable to train them on altar guild. I mean, it's just there's a lot going on. There's a lot to be done, but yeah, it's exciting. It really is, and at the same time, ministry also has its frustrations, because anytime you deal with people, or even priests deal with their own stuff, their own sin that they can't go and broadcast. Yeah, you have good days and bad days. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, like I said, it's always a joy to visit St. Philip's and to see the energy and the vibrancy of your parish. So we're grateful to have you in the diocese and for your work.
yeah,
Please do join us again on November 6th, when we'll hear from Bishop Scarlett about his remnant perspective on spiritual formation and renewal. Thanks again for being with us, Father Wade.
thank you.